All right, so today we're actually introducing a new topic. Americans felt very differently about the law and about justice at our founding than was the case in other places. So here we have a quote from John Adams, who's of course an attorney. Actually, the idea of supporting yourself as an attorney here by 1770 is really a relatively new idea. Kind of, if you roll the clock back 50 years earlier, it would be really unusual to find someone who says their career is an attorney. It's more of the kind of pursuit that the gentleman would kind of do in his spare time, the law would be. But now here in America, we're getting people who are saying, that's my career, I'm going to make my living with the law. And John Adams is kind of one of the early ones who's doing this. He has a farm, he's a farmer, but he's really making his living at the law. Probably don't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about the Boston Massacre. Actually, I would like to spend a whole lot of time talking about the Boston Massacre, but let's just go ahead and get to the quote. You're familiar with kind of what happened. A bunch of soldiers fired on some unarmed colonists, killing, what, five, six, or seven of them. And of course, you know, Boston by this time has a pretty good reputation for rioting. And it's almost a miracle that there was no riot as a result of this. But Governor Hutchinson, who might have been lieutenant governor at the time, came out and promised a fair trial for these guys. And John Adams, of course, steps forward to give them a fair defense, understanding that it was really important that that it really was a fair trial, that they really had to have good recognition. It was very unpopular for him to make that decision to do it. And he realizes that he may very well be kind of throwing away his career by giving a rigorous defense to these really hated British soldiers. Why are they so hated? By this time, 1770, roughly 1 out of every 5 residents of the city of Boston is a British soldier. It's a huge military presence. Why are they here? They're here because Parliament wants to compel America to start paying their taxes. We've been pretty good, you know, for the past 100 years. Parliament would levy a tax, we wouldn't pay it. They would send someone over to enforce it. They would spend more enforcing it than they got by collecting the tax, and they would give up. It was a pattern that we just repeated over and over again. But now, after the 7 Years' War, Parliament's serious about it. Not only you know, do we dislike having all these soldiers here, they're here to make us pay our taxes. What are soldiers allowed to do when they're not on duty? Any legal thing, including look for work. And so they've got board and room taken care of. They're bored, they'll work for almost nothing. So in addition to being here to make us pay our taxes, they are depressing the price of labor. So they're kind of hated for multiple reasons. Anyway, he says this at the trial. He says, facts are stubborn things, and whatever may be the wishes or the inclinations or dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. Of course, you know the ending of the story here, at least part of it. Does Mr. Adams get an acquittal for all of these soldiers? For Captain Preston, the leader there, complete acquittal. Of the other, it's either other 7 or 8, all but 2 are completely acquitted. 2, and the charge was murder. The 2 that weren't acquitted outright, they were convicted of the lesser crime of manslaughter. What's the penalty for murder? Death penalty. What's the penalty for manslaughter? Death penalty. Good news, you're not convicted of murder, only manslaughter. Bad news, it's the same penalty, except that manslaughter is administered with what's referred to as the benefit of clergy. Have you heard of it? You know what this means, the benefit of clergy? So by this time in England, in fact, roll the clock back even a couple hundred years, a very uncomfortable relationship with the death penalty in England. Oh, this was more than I intended to say. We'll wrap it up with this. If you stole goods worth more than a shilling, it was a capital punishment. What's a shilling? It's like 20 pence in a shilling, 12 shillings in a pound, or something like that. It's not a huge amount of money. We're pretty uncomfortable killing someone for stealing things, you know, worth more than a shilling. And so we said, well, you know what, if you could prove that you're a clergyman, well, that meant you weren't held liable to the civil law, you were held to the church law. And so if you're convicted of a capital crime that was subject to the benefit of clergy, such as manslaughter, and you could prove that you were a clergyman, then your sentence was commuted. You were let off. It wasn't like, oh, your life in prison. Instead, no, it's just you're off. What did you have to do to prove that you were a clergyman in the 1700s in Great Britain? You had to be able to read one verse of the Bible. And you got to pick the verse. True, it was in Latin, but you got to pick the verse. After these two are convicted, they said, hold on a second, we're clergymen. You're clergymen? Prove it. Read the Bible. They read their verse of the Bible. And who knew these guys were clergymen? And so instead of being executed, they were branded. So kind of went into the meaty part of their thumb. They're branded with an M for manslaughter, because you only get to invoke the benefit of clergy once in your life. Oh, a little interesting thing about British jurisprudence in the 18th century. All right. Do you want to save this? Sure. Oh, let's talk about kind of scheduling stuff here. So Zoom, no, let's go to the schedule. Let's go to student view. All right, so next project is due next Monday. So big Boggle project. Oh, I should have brought the game, shoot. So big Boggle is it's a word game. You've got an array of 25, an array, interesting. Yeah, it's actually an array. You'll probably use an array to solve the problem, but it's an array of cubes. You shake them up and you get a randomized position of each cube, a randomized face showing, and then it's just, what words can you spell and those that are actually, touching each other in the cube. So I'm asking you to duplicate the play of that game in Excel. You don't have to find out what the words are or do scoring or anything, but just shaking the dice. And so in the assignment, I've given you the actual composition of the dice. So here's 25 dice, here's all the letters that are on each side. And so it's going to be your job to do it. Now, if you think about it, it's really pretty similar to the traveling salesman problem. The traveling salesman problem, we've got to figure out a route to go to, shall we say, 25 different locations. In the Boggle situation, you got to figure out a route to place the 25 different cubes. So it's conceptually pretty similar. What's the algorithm that we use in the traveling salesman problem, the next nearest city algorithm? Well, you choose the next cube by finding the closest one. What's going to be the algorithm for Boggle? It's going to be just choose another random one. So it's a different algorithm that you're using to place, to decide the order, but it's still pretty similar to what we've done before. There's a lot of similarity. Okay, so questions on that project coming up?
Yeah, I was just about to load directions. So like each die, you roll 25 die and they each just have one letter. Is that correct?
Let's see if we can find a picture of the game. Bib, goggle, big Boggle. I got it yet? Not quite yet. Okay, so here's the game here. Now this one's a little different, it's a newer version. So there is no TH. It's just one. The one exception is that there's actually a U that goes along with the Q, but I think in the instructions I said you can just ignore that, just put the Q on the face. So I've given you the composition of the die. You can't just randomly pick letters and put them there. You've got to randomly pick the dice, put them in a position, and then randomly pick a face off of each of the cubes. So, the way it plays here, if we look at, that's not going to be very good because I can't actually hover over what I'm looking for. Stand by. The video. Maybe this one will work. Everything's so fancy. Okay, this should do the trick for us. So I think this is actually the original set. It's the right color to be the original set. So if we look at the, how would you play this game? Let's see if I can find a word in here. H-A-N-G. So here, these are all touching each other. So you could spell the word hang, H-A-N-G. That would be one word. T-E-A-T-E-N. I don't think 3-letter words are allowed, so 10 wouldn't work.
3 letters are allowed.
3 letters are allowed? Okay, so 10 would be a word here. T-I-P, tip is a word, and P-I-T-P-E-A-L. P-E-A-L is a word, so you could have peel. So that's kind of how you play. So if you look at this cube right here, the one with the X on it, it has the Z, the X, the B, the J, the X, and the K. That's the face. That's the faces of that cube, which means you can't spell the word Zax. It's a great word for Scrabble to know Z-A-X. It's a knife for splitting roof slates. But you can't spell Zax in this game because there's one X and there's one Z, and they're on the same cube. They can't both be in play at the same time. Okay, so the grader will check to make sure that you're actually displaying valid games. So you're going to have to figure out how to get those dice to appear to one side of each die appearing in a random cell in the grid. That's the idea. Questions? Does that answer it? Does that clear it up for you? Yeah. Okay, so the other thing I was trying to figure out, I actually wanted to hold the review session for the midterm exam tomorrow, but I have one student who is out with COVID who has not yet taken it. And then I realized that we had canceled class for the MBA business trips. How many of you are actually going to be gone for the MBA business trips? Maybe, so, but I think that's going to be our best day to get people together. So we're going to go ahead and do it in class that day. If you are gone from town, then I can come to my office. We can review the exam individually. So I know I promised we'd cancel class, and it's a class you could skip just fine, but that's when we're going to hold the review over the midterm. Other questions? All right. Today we're going to start with a blank workbook. Oh, no, we're not. We got one to download. What am I thinking? So let me go ahead and download the workbook. Today is the 20th. No, today is, oh, not September 20th. October 20th. And I've got product form.xlsm is going to be our starting position. All right, so we've got some data to work with here, and we're going to be building then something that I think should just be called a form, but in VBA land, it's called a user form. So, so far we've kind of seen a couple of ways that we could interact with a user. We could display up a message box where you can put a message to the user, and we can have some control over which buttons appear there, but it's really pretty lean. It's some text, we could put the title, we can change the buttons. We've seen something called an input box where we could display something up to the user and they could type one little line of text in and we could get the value from that. But if we're going to try to do something more complex, where we say maybe we want to pick up 3 pieces of information and maybe 2 of those you're going to type in like first and a last name, and then they'll drop down their their graduation year or something from a drop down list. We'd like to be able to give that kind of functionality, and that's what user forms are used for. And so it's going to allow us to be able to make much more complex dialog boxes. And so that's what we're going to take a look at today. Let me see if I can mute my phone here. All right, so let me go ahead and open up the Visual Basic Editor. That wasn't it. Alt F11. There we go. I made some kind of chart. I don't want this. All right, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. Okay, so you may remember kind of early in the semester, I said, listen, the only place that we're going to have did I download the wrong one? I think I downloaded one that's actually got a product. It's got the form's done. Good news, class is over. We actually have the whole solution here. Stand by. Product form XLSM. That's the one I downloaded, isn't it? Okay, well, that's okay. We'll just throw the solution away and we'll start again. That'll be okay. Control J. Means I posted the wrong file. Not the end of the world. I didn't really want to update Excel. Whoops. Okay. Alt F11 and zoom in. Okay. So let's go ahead and start off by seeing what we have here in the module. I think we're just going to delete this. Let's leave the module here. But this form, let's just go ahead and right click it and choose remove. How come I can't remove? Am I editing a cell or something? There we go. I'm not sure what I had before. We can right click where it says form product and say remove form product. We're going to build that from scratch. Do you want to export it before removing it? This is like, it's almost like you're saying, are you sure? That's not what it's asking. It's saying, do you want to save this before you delete it? And I'm saying no. Okay. All right, so here we have then a project. We've got a module here that has some code in it that I'm fine to leave there, but we're going to be working in a user form. Now, you may remember that, and you may not, but at the very beginning of the semester, I said there's only one place that we can write code that will stick around in VBA, and that's in a module. I'm not going to write it in the immediate window. It's gone when we close Excel, but if we want to save it, it's going to be in a module. Now, what we're going to see here is that there are several different kinds of modules. So let's just take a look at it. I'm going to come into the insert menu here. And normally when we insert a module, it's just one called module. But there's another module here called a class module. Class module allows us to create our own objects. So we've used like built-in objects. We've used worksheets and workbooks and ranges. I think we might have done some stuff with shapes. Have we looked at charts yet? If not, we're going to look at chart objects. And so these are kind of built into Excel. We're going to learn about some kind of objects that we say, well, it's not built into Excel, but we can still go ahead and use it and create it, but so an object that someone else has made. But if we want to make our own object to where we say, oh, it's got all these properties and got all these methods, and we want to create 4 or 5 of these objects and kind of keep them all separate at the same time, then we can do that using the class module. It's beyond what we're doing in this course, but it's something you can do with VBA. You can make your own objects. That's what the class module is for. The user form actually is what we're doing now. There's a module built into the user form. So I'm going to go ahead and click a new user form. And then if I double click anywhere on the user form, that will bring up the module that's a part of the user form. So we will be writing our code into a module, but this is a module that's built into this user form. Okay. We ready to go? We've got a new user form then created. And we go ahead and let's go ahead and go back to the user form itself. So these little buttons right here will let you toggle back and forth between your code, the module, and the user form canvas, where you can kind of create, kind of lay this thing out visually. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to need is to look at this toolbox right here. So for right now, I think I'm probably zoomed in past it. Let me go ahead. I'm always a little hesitant to click on this because it looks vaguely communist to me. It's a hammer crossed with a wrench. I'm always kind of wondered about what will happen if I click on that. I'm trying to find out where it brought that up. Oh, here it is. No, it's not. Oh, here, it's way down here. Okay. Before too long, we'll zoom out. I just want to let you see some of the stuff that we're looking at here while it's still kind of large. Okay. So yeah, so this brings up my controls. I should not have turned it off because now it went back to the middle again. Brings up this controls toolbox. Whew, here it is. Okay, controls are just objects. Controls, I got to remember that when I first was kind of learning about Visual Basic, that it was so strange to me that the word for these things is controls. They're objects, they're visual objects that we're going to put onto our form to allow us to interact with the user. Why do they call them controls? I don't know, but that's what they're called. And so all of these different controls that we have here allow us to do different things. So this first one is called the label control. It just allows us to put static text onto a form. It's the text that we can change through code, but the user can't change it. This next one is the text box. This is text the user can change. If you put it there, the user can type in and change it. And we can tell what the user has done to change it. This one's called a list box. Gives a list of options. Here's a combo box, which is a combination of the list and the text box, the checkbox, the radio buttons or option buttons. And some others. We can put image here on the form. We can kind of make it a tabbed interface and scroll bars and so forth. So is this all of the controls that we have available? No, these are just the ones that kind of come built in by default to Excel. Anything that's here in this toolbox by default, you can guarantee is going to be available on the machine that you take your workbook to. Now, if we look, if I right click and choose additional controls, then it's going to say, is there more? Oh, there's way more. Let's see if I can find where that went. Hello, additional controls, where did you go? Right click, additional controls. Yeah, so the question is, can you show me how to insert the form again? Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. Remove form. Just choose insert from the insert menu and choose user form. And that should give you this form. Let me go ahead and bring up my tools. And I'm curious as to why I'm not seeing my additional controls. Well, apparently on this machine, I don't have access to the additional controls, but when you right click and choose additional controls, you're getting a list of controls. It's like 100 of them listed there. And those are all there because you've got other stuff installed on this computer. There's no guarantee that when you bring any of those in, that when you take that workbook to someone else's computer, that control will be available to them. But there's probably an Adobe Acrobat Reader control. You could actually put a PDF form right there or a PDF page document right onto your form. There's like a web browser control form. You can put a web browser onto the form. I think it's Internet Explorer, so it's probably a really bad idea to do that. There are lots of different controls out there. But we're going to limit ourselves to the ones that are available just right here in this control box. All right, so let's talk about kind of what the goal here is. If I look at the data that we've got, this is just product data, from some kind of outdoor store. All right, come down here and pick something. So here's one line. It's work pants made by the manufacturer Dickies at $17, straight leg work jeans 34 by 30. There's the picture, at least the link to the picture of it, and a little more wordy description. So all the information for that product is there, but in terms of being able to edit the data for that one record of information, this is a really bad interface for that. I mean, it's not that much information, and yet I can't see it on the screen, all on the screen at one time. Why not? Because when I'm trying to edit this record number 92, I'm showing a whole bunch of information that I don't care about. I don't care about any of that. I don't care about any of this. And yet just the way that the grid is laid out, that's taking up most of my screen. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to take that user form canvas and say, let's bring all this information from one row and let's organize it in a way that we can see it all on the screen. And then we'll give the user a chance to edit it. And plus, that'll give us a chance when we're kind of editing it that way to do some other kind of validity checks and make sure that they haven't done things that we don't want done to the data. So that's the idea. So let's go ahead and see how to do it. So first of all, zoom in again, if I can control my zoom a little bit better. Okay. So first of all, I want to change some properties of the form itself. So I haven't brought any controls on yet, but the form here is selected. And now if I look over here to my properties window, I can see various properties that I have the ability to change. One of them is the name of the form. So I'm going to come in here and say user form 1 is the default. If I added another form, it would be user form 2 and user form 3. That's a really bad name. I'd like to have something that's a little more descriptive. And so I'm going to call this form FRM product. Form product. And there's kind of this convention for when you name the controls or the form itself to use 3 letters at the beginning that let you know what kind of object it is. So now when I look at this reference to this object in code, it's going to start off with FRM. I'll go, we're talking about a form. Because there's going to be several things that I'm going to want to give the same name to. So I might have a label that says product name, and I might have a text box that says product name. So we're going to say the word product name, and then we're going to actually put next to it the product name for the user to enter. Those are both called product name. I can't name them both the same thing. So one will be my label product name, LBL product name, And the other one will be my text box product name, txt product name. So the kind of this naming convention of putting a little prefix on the front to say what kind of object it is actually pretty standard here. Now, you'll notice that when I change that from user form 1 to form product, it did not, that is not a good sign. Did it actually change for me? I somehow started, I think started doing an update for Excel when I started here. So let me make sure that's not still trying to update. Okay, we've closed Excel. Open up that again. Do not update now. Alt F11. How are you doing here in the room? Can you see that this lettering is pretty small, but can you see it okay? We can do this without zooming in, okay. Let me try again to change the name of this to FRM product. Okay, yeah, it must have been because I was like somehow in the middle of an aborted update or something, so I think we're okay now. But it didn't change the little the name that's showing here in the title bar of the form. Well, that's a different property. This down here called caption. So the name is how I'm going to refer to this through my code. Over here for caption, I'm going to change that from user form 1 to be edit product info. Yes.
How do you see that window that you're working?
This one over here, properties, or this one.
Yeah, the property.
Okay, so yeah, so this is called the Project Explorer. This one, upper left-hand corner. The properties window is called the properties window. Just choose View Properties. Properties window. F4 is the hotkey that will bring it up. Yeah. If you lose your Project Explorer, it's this one. You can kind of close that and bring it back. View the Project Explorer. And of course, Control G brings up the immediate window, which we might want to have open here later on. Question? So a path error? Yeah. Interesting. Who else is getting a path error when you try? A whole bunch of us. Close Excel, open it up again. That's what I did, and it went away. So did you try that? And you're still getting the same thing? Yikes.
That wasn't working for me. I made sure that I was out of design mode because when I was in design mode.
I don't even know what design mode means. What do you mean you were in design mode?
So in the developer tab. Yeah, in the developer tab in the control section.
Developer. Where's my developer tab? Good heavens. Let's take a look. What you're saying is that make sure you're out of design mode. Let me just see if we can expose that. I need to redo my ribbon developer. So there's this design mode that you were in. Yeah, so make sure you're not in design mode. Was that the case for you down here? No, still no good. Whew. And make sure that I can still change it. Who knows what's going on here? I've never kind of bumped into this problem before in class. So I'm changing okay now. Is there anyone who was having a trouble changing it and got it to change? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I did what you did. And when I restarted Excel,
Okay, so you closed Excel, opened it up again. No, it's not just closed the workbook, but closed Excel all the way down. Another comment?
Because I think it has to do with the fact that because we're creating a new form that has the same name as the original file.
Oh.
And so you have to save it when you exit out.
Interesting.
I don't know. That's what worked for me is I had to save it, then exit out, then get back in and change it.
Or we should be able to kind of close choose this to a different name. So try changing it, call it form prod instead of form product and see if it'll do that. That's what I get for posting the wrong file to start class today. Should have started with the blank one. Any luck down here, front row guy?
Yeah.
That worked?
So
Just changing the name. So if it's getting stuck on form product, call it form prod. In fact, I'm going to call mine form prod too. Let's just all call it form prod. That way we'll have the same value. And that should be okay. Interesting. Try to name it as the same name that was there before. Wow, brilliant. You get a gold star for today. Gold stars don't affect your grade, as you may recall, but they're nice to have. You tell your mom you got a gold star today. Okay, so now I've kind of configured this, and I can change the size of this form, just by kind of resizing this canvas here. So that actually controls the size that this will appear at. Now, you're familiar with using the little play button or pressing F5 to run your code. That'll just run whatever code is active. Well, if I'm editing a user form, then that will just display that user form. So here's the user form the way that I've built it. There's nothing on it yet, but I can see that it says edit product information here at the top, and I can close it with the little X. I should be able to get back into my form product here as well. Questions? One thing that's a little bit annoying to me is if you're actually down here, the focus is over here in your properties window, even if you're not editing something and you hit play, it's like, yeah, we don't know what you're talking about. So you actually have to have selected the user form and then you hit play and it will bring that up. Okay, so let's start off by actually putting the like the product ID on. I don't think I want my user editing the product ID. I'll let them change the name, I'll let them change the manufacturer, the price, they can change anything, but you're not going to change the product ID. And so for this, I'm going to give them a tool that will let them see the information but not change it, and that's going to be my label control right here. So I'll click that to select it, and then I'll come and draw that label control in. And I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. So I've got the label control selected, and I'm going to come here and give it a name of LBL, little prefix LBL. Lets me know it's a label, and then I'm going to call it ID, LBL ID. This is going to be for my product ID, so I'll call it LBL ID. Now there's some properties that we can change about this as well. One of them is the caption. But we're going to make it so that when we run this form, it reads the caption off the active cell or off of the active row. So we won't try to change that here in design. We'll do that at runtime. But I would like to put a border. So border style right now is 0. I'm going to change the border style to 1. That will give me a 1 pixel border around it. And I think I'm going to make the back style a little bit darker. So, whoops, the back color that is. The back style is going to be, and I can either pick up a color that's kind of defined in the system, like what's the normal color of your buttons, or I can just make it a particular color over here. I think I want to make it kind of a dark gray. Maybe that's a little darker than I want to do it. Yeah, so that's a little darker than the background. And that to me kind of says, all right, it's a field. I can see it's a field because it's got a rectangle around it, but it's kind of got a dark gray background. It's going to signal that's something you don't edit. If it's got a white background, you can edit it. If it's got a dark gray background, you're not going to be able to edit. Okay, so now I think I'm ready to actually have it read the product number off the current row. So to do this, we've got to get to the code that we're writing for this form. I am going to double click anywhere on the form, and that will bring up my user form. It'll bring up the module for this user form. And it's going to guess at what I wanted. It's saying, you probably want to make something happen when the user clicks the form. I don't want that at all. So I'm going to delete this. I'll leave option explicit there. And now we have to think a little bit differently now about the way that we want our code to execute. In fact, maybe even before we talk about this, let's put an OK button on the bottom. Let me back up here. Come back to my form. Yeah, and let's go ahead and put one in for the name of the product. We won't fill it in yet. But the next one over here is going to be the text box control. I'll select that. And we'll kind of put that right next to the ID. Might make that a little bit taller. And this one I'm going to name TXT name. And then I'm going to give a command button. So after I've got my text box in, I'm going to come here and choose the command button. And I'm just going to put an OK command button down here at the bottom. I'll name this CMD OK. And for the caption, I'm just going to put OK. Okay, so now we've got a few controls on our form. We don't have them doing much yet, but we have to think differently now about how we're going to get code to execute. So far, all the code we've written, we've said, all right, it's time to run it by pressing a hotkey or saying run this macro, or kind of running it from the development environment, pressing F5 or pressing the little green play button. All ways that we can say, I'm ready to run this code. But now we have to think about it in a little more complex way, because instead of there just being one big block of code that runs behind this form, we're going to put little bits of it in places. And we're going to say, listen, when the user clicks on this button, we want it to close the form. So let's take a look at what we're doing. Let me go ahead and double click the OK button. And it's going to guess that I'm going to say for my command button called OK, I want this to be the click event. So now it takes two things. We have to say when something happens to a particular object, that's what's going to trigger the code. And it really is just by the name. If this is the name of an object, underscore, and this is the name of an event, we'll see what those events are here in just a minute, then that's what's going to execute this. And all I'm going to say here is unload form prod. So I'm saying I want to unload the product form. So if the form's up in memory, if I say unload it, it just takes it out of memory and it closes it. So now if I run this, this is set up here. The user could type something in. We're not putting it anywhere here. This is some kind of a goose decoy or something. So the user can type that in. We haven't. It's like up to us to actually get that to save somewhere in the worksheet. But we should now be able to click on that OK button, and it should close the form. Because when that object, the button, receives the click event, it will do what that code said to do. All right. So now we've got a couple of list boxes, drop-down boxes that have been here from the beginning on all of our modules, but we've never paid attention to them. And so I'm going to drop down this first one, and it's going to give me the list of objects that I could attach code to. So I should see some, I should recognize these. It just says user form here. That's my FRM prod. That's my user form object. But here's the other controls that I put on the form: txt name, lblid, and cmdok. So I'm going to select cmdok here, and that says that's the object I'm interested in. And now my other dropdown over here is going to be the different events that that object can receive. So click seems to make sense. When you click on that button, you want it to do something, but I can make code execute in response to all kinds of different events. So one of them is like double click. If someone double clicks this form, I could run a completely different set of code. I could have, let's see, what other of these are going to be really clear? Before paste, before drop, those are a little complex. So enter, I think when that receives the focus, you know how if you tab, you can kind of make the different controls get the focus? That's the enter event. So as soon as it gets the focus, we could have some code execute here. Oh, look at this one, mouse move. Let's go ahead and do mouse move. So mouse move is an event that will trigger every time the mouse moves even 1 pixel over the top of that button. You don't have to click it, just have to move the mouse on it. So, we could do something here. So let's do this. And by the way, you'll notice that when the mouse move event gets called, the system is going to be passing in information. Is the shift key down? Which button is pressed at this point? What is the X and Y coordinates of where the event is happening with respect to the button itself? Is it in the upper left-hand corner, the bottom right-hand corner, or somewhere else? So we'll have access to all that information because it's getting sent into this function. But here's what I'm going to do. When the mouse moves over this, I'm going to change one of the properties of the button. So the button is cmdok, and I'm going to change the left property of it And I'll set that equal to, for right now, I'll set it equal to 100. We'll do something a little more playful with this in just a moment, but. Okay, so what is that going to do? And what is going to cause it to happen? Any ideas what this line of code will do? Take a guess. I haven't taught it to you yet. Take a guess. It's going to move the button. Yeah, it's going to move the button. So I am saying the button object, CMD OK, I want to change the left property to be 100. And this form is probably maybe 600 pixels wide. They're not pixels, it's some other unit, but it's about 600 wide. So it should move substantially to the left. I'll go ahead and hit the play button here. And I'm going to bring my mouse down here, but as soon as I move it, so that it causes that, now it's not going to move again because it's every time it's still saying set the left property to 100, but it's already there. Okay, so here's what I'd like to do. Instead of just setting it to 100, let me set it to a random proportion, RND, times the forms, FRM prod, dot FRM prod dot inside width. So that form has some width. And if I just ask for the width, it's like the outside width, including the borders on the form. Inside width is just what's inside of the borders. So that'll be pretty good. So now this will give me a random number between 0 and 1 times how wide that is. And so each time I move now over that, it should move to a different location somewhere on the form. Now that one, you can see the button is kind of hanging off the edge of the page a little bit because I'm telling the left to go anywhere between the very beginning and the very end. And so, yeah, I could actually get it to where I couldn't see it. I mean, it could end up all the way over here at the full width and I wouldn't be able to see it. So I don't want that to happen. So let me go ahead and instead of giving it that whole width, I want to take that width minus the width of my button, CMD OK dot width. So now if I get a 1 for my rand function, it will put the left of it. There'll still be enough room for the whole button to show. Well, I don't want the button to disappear. But here, while we're at it, why don't we do this? Moving it left to right is one thing, but let's also move it top to bottom. Let's make it really go to a random position. CMD top. It's going to be a random position of the inside height minus the height of my button. Oh yeah, it's going to be really hard to click. Not impossible. What has to happen for me to be able to click this? What's that? Oh no, I could invoke it by tabbing to it, but that's not going to let me click it. Could I click it? That's right. If it moves not far enough away that the mouse happens to be under it, and I don't trigger another mouse move event, which is really unlikely, right? So of course, what else are we going to do here? You guys will like this one. Let's see if you can get the joke by reading the code. You'll see what's going to happen. We're adding something. Edna in accounting is going to love us for this. Each time this happens, let's do this. Let's say CMD OK dot width equals what it used to be minus 2. What's this going to do? Every time it moves, what's it going to do? It's going to get a little bit smaller. It's not going to get smaller very fast. It's going to be kind of imperceptible at the beginning. So Edna is going to be over here going, okay, where's that button? And about now, she's going to go, is that button getting, it is getting smaller. How, oh no, what? I'm going to get it though. Oh no. Oops. Where is it? It's somewhere, but it's probably 0 pixels wide. It's 0 wide. Now, it might be, I'm going to get a close look. It might be 1 wide, but I don't see it on there anywhere. Oh boy. So the only thing we could do to make this better is come in here and say, if the day of the current time from the system clock now is equal to 1, and the month of the current time is equal to what? 4, then we do this. Now, when will this code execute? On April Fool's Day. That's the only time this button's going to move around unusually. The rest of the time, this button's going to behave just normally because our click is still going to work if you can click on it. But now, because it's not April 1st, the code that's, first of all, is that code being triggered right now? I move the mouse. Yeah, it's being triggered, but the first thing we do is we check to say, hey, is it April Fool's Day? If it is, we'll go ahead and do all this. Otherwise, we won't. But and so yeah, this is kind of fun to do. And might you do this? Yeah, maybe. It's not very productive. But the whole point here is to really enforce that what we're doing to make any of this code execute is it's going to take a combination of an object receiving an event. That's the new way for us to think about how our code works. How does this code get triggered? When an object receives a particular event. That's when the code's going to get executed. Okay? All right. So now let's think about actually getting the code to show up here. I mean, we want this label to show with the actual product ID, and we want the name of the product to show in here. So think about it in terms of object and an event. Maybe drop down the list boxes here and kind of pick one and snoop around. But what do you think the combination of object and event is that we're going to need to get the user form to get the data into it? Where are we going to write the code to put the data there in the first place? So what object should we look at? What event should we look at? So out of all of our objects that are here listed, which object do you think is the most likely? There's only 4 to choose from. Well, you might say it's the label, since that's what we're going to put it on. But what event do we want to have happen? Do we want to put the mouse move event on the label? So when the user moves the mouse over the label, it shows up what the product ID is? Probably not. It's actually the object we want. It's going to be our user form. So let's go ahead and select the user form. And now just look through the different events that you can choose from. And just kind of look at the names and think, which one do you think it is? Oh, yeah, go ahead. Just call it out.
I don't understand why you're switching from user form to command OK on that top tab. Nothing below it changed.
So nothing has changed down here. All this is saying is I'm getting ready to get a combination of an object and an event. And as soon as I pick the event, it will change. So now, what event do you think we're going to use here? What event, the description of something happening to this form, are we going to want to actually say, here's where we want to run the code to put the values onto the form? A little louder. Query close would be when the form is about ready to close. It's asking if it's allowed to close. Initialize is the one. Usually folks will come up with activate, the very first one. Activate would do it, but activate happens more often than we want to have happen. Initialize is here. The initialize event, I'll go ahead and click it. That's going to give me my user form initialize event. The initialize event is going to happen when the form first gets loaded into memory. So when we load the form into memory, we're saying, let's go ahead and show it. Let's go ahead and put the data onto the form. This will even happen before the form becomes visible. So when this form is coming up, first thing that happens is that it gets initialized. All the code for initialize happens, and then it shows the form. So it actually will put the information on it before it ever gets shown. That's good. So it won't be like the form comes up and then the data comes in. Like even before you see it, the data will be populated in here. Okay, so now let's do this. Instead of, well, let's go ahead and we'll start off by writing it here. Let's first start off by saying we want to keep track of which row, we want to find out what row we're on. So let me go ahead and declare a variable called row. make that as a long integer. And then here, let's set row equal to the active cell dot row. So we're going to read whatever row the active cell is, and then we're going to put that into my row property or my row variable. And so now we're going to use that to actually write, to get the information, into that control. So the name of my control is LBLID. There's a set of properties that it has, and the property I'm interested in is called caption. I'm going to set that equal to, let's see, look at my sheet. My sheet is called, if I look over here in my Project Explorer, I can see the sheet that says products on it has the name of data. And so I can just refer to that sheet through its code name, data.cells, row number, row, column number 1. So I'm just going to look at the particular sheet, the particular cell, row, whatever row we're on, column number 1. I'll read the value from that and I'll put that into the caption. So let me check and make sure which row I'm on. So here I am on row 88, and it should put in 785,497. 4797. I'll go ahead and run it. And it has brought in 785,4797. So it's put that in there. Okay, questions on this code? Show me on a scale of 0 to 5 how comfortable you are with this code that we just wrote. 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 3, 5, 5, 5. Okay, good. 4. It's a little bit different because we're saying what causes this to get executed. It gets executed when a particular object receives a particular event. Now, ultimately, question here in the back. Go ahead.
What was the LBL ID again?
So LBL ID is the name that I gave to this object right here. So this control, I named it on the name property. I named it LBL ID. So that is the name of this control. Did you get yours named? You get that going, then that should make that code work for you. Okay. So what I would like to do, it's tempting to just kind of build this out on initialize, but I think it will be healthier for us if we say, let's create a sub-procedure called show data. So we'll have one procedure just for showing all the data, and we'll just call it from our initialize. So, and in fact, I'm probably going to want to know when it comes time to saving the data, I'm going to want to know what row we opened with. And so instead of declaring this variable row inside my initialize, I'm going to go ahead and move that up to the top of my module. So right below option explicit, I'm going to have a module level variable called row. Now I can still go ahead and populate that down here in my initialize, and I think probably will. So when we initialize the data, we'll read the row off whichever sheet we're on. And then we're going to call show data. And I'll take the one line so far that's showing the data, and I'm going to go ahead and move that. I think I'll put this also at the very top. I'll make a sub-procedure called show data. Okay, so now let's see if we can get all of this showing here. So this code should now behave the same. I've just kind of reorganized things. I've got a module level variable called row. So I can set the value down here when I initialize the form, and I can still read that value later. And then after I set that value, I'm just saying, hey, go ahead and call the show data procedure, which is doing that same line. This will give me a little nicer organization so that I can kind of look at this and say, this is where all my data is getting shown. So I'm going to copy this line because it's going to be pretty similar to get the name in there. Now, the name of that control was txt name. And it turns out I don't have a caption property that I'm using. Instead, I'm going to use a text property. So text box has a text property that the user modifies. And the name, I think, comes out of column 6. Let me go take a look. Yeah, A, B, C, D, E, F. Yeah, column 6, and has the name. This is where the name of the product is. Custom brass banded spec clear. That's a great name for a product. And so now that should, when I run this, it should bring in the product ID and the name of the product. And let's go to the code. Questions? Okay, let's go ahead and get this so that we can save the data. So let's put a sub procedure here called save data. And when we call save data, we're just going to do this line in reverse. Now, there's no reason for us to try to save the ID because the user doesn't have the ability to change the ID. But the user does have the ability to change the name. And so we're gonna read this in the opposite direction. So when we read it, when we're initializing the form, bringing the data on, we're saying, go look on the worksheet and then put that into the property. Now we're gonna say, look at the property and just put that back into the worksheet. Now we just got to give ourselves a way to call this. So why don't we just say when you click OK, before we close the form, before we unload the form, let's just call save data. And of course, ultimately, we'll have a lot more happening in save data than just the one, but this should get us to where we can open the form, have it read the data, put it in there, we can change it and save it and have it write it back out to the worksheet. Okay, so let me go ahead and run my form. And instead of custom brass banded spec clear, I will change it to cloudy. And we should watch when I click OK, we should see it change right here in cell F2. Well, see now that it's changed. All right. Let me just do one thing a little bit unusual. Let me come up here to my very first row. And so now my active row is row 1. Is this a row that I want to be editing? No, this is the column names. Don't be changing the column names. But based on what we've written right now, that should still bring that information in. Yeah, it's bringing in name from F1. So someone tell me, what should I do to say, listen, don't be editing it on F1. Where should we put the code that says, if you're on row 1, either put up a message that says you can't edit this, or just say, well, at the very top, maybe you want to edit row 1 of the data. So we could just, maybe tell it to do row 2 or 3. Where should we put this code? And what should the code be? The idea here is that if you're on row 1, I don't want you editing row 1. I want you editing row 2. The first row with data. Where will this code go? Right in the initialize. Yeah. So as soon as we initialize, before we even set that, maybe right after we set the row. So we've just read the row. Let's just now say, listen, if row is equal to 1, then let's just change it. Row equals 2. So now if row 1 is the active row, well, you're at the very top of the form. Let's let you edit the very first editable record. Even though what's active is row 1, we're now going to be showing the information for row 2. We might want to do something similar if we're way too far off the bottom of the page. Might kind of look and say, hey, if there's no data here, then push us up to row 1, or maybe find the bottom one and do the bottom one. Lots of different things we can do. Questions? Okay, So one of the things that having a user form is going to let us do, it's going to let us have data validation algorithms. So now we can say, listen, when the user clicks OK, when we go to save this, we can start checking things. For example, I don't think we want to let them save a product that has no name. We'll let you change it, but you got to have something there. So let's do this. Now I'm going to come up here to where it says save data. And maybe I'll just come in here and do some little comment for some data validation. And let's just say if, we'll look at this, and maybe we'll say if the length of whatever is in the text property of the txt name object, if that is less than 1, or we could say if it's equal 0 or something, then what should we do? We now know the length of the name is 0. If we're inside that if box, what do you think we should do? Let's tell the user that we're not going to let them save it. You can't save this data. And so we'll just use a message box here. And there's several ways that we could do it. We could write it somewhere else, but let's just use a message box. MSG box. The prompt is name, product name cannot be empty. Second argument, let's make this a critical thing. That'll give us a nice sound and a big red X. And then users love it when you do this. For the title of this, I'll put user error. That'll just show in the title of this message box. Okay, so talk to me about now what this code is going to do. When we get to save data, let's suppose that the user has gotten rid of the name from in the text box. Someone talk me through it. We're going to hit this, and the length of this is going to be, this will be an empty string. So the length of the empty string will be 0. So this will be true. What's next? This expression is true. What's going to happen next? It'll show the message box up, and the user will click OK. What happens next? Yeah, it's going to save it anyway. It's going to come right down here and save it out. So what should we do, and where should we put the statement to kind of prevent that from happening? Are you answering the question or asking a separate one?
Yeah, answering it.
Go ahead.
So right before the edit, you put exit sub.
Exactly. EXIT sub. So if we got into here to show the message box, once the user dismisses it, get us out of here. So that'll prevent us from hitting this line of code here. So now if I run this, okay, let me do this. Let me kind of split my screen. We can see the name here. If I go ahead and run this and get rid of this, say OK, we get the user error, product name cannot be empty, nice little red X there. We say OK, and it's going to now skip by the line that would have made that go empty. So we can do what, what my mother would probably think to do if she really wanted that to be empty. Can't be empty, she's going to put a space in there. OK. Now, what do you think? What's the length of a space going to be? 1, yeah. So this is going to be false, and we should go ahead and write that out. So that's no good. So what would I do? What function that we've talked about would let me kind of prevent that from happening? Yep.
Trim.
That's right. I'm just going to put trim right around the reference there. So to get rid of any leading or trailing spaces, really should have saved that somewhere else. Let's see. Okay, so now I should be able to run this. And if I just put a space in there, say, okay, it'll still tell us it can't be empty. Ah, interesting. So we hit save data, and it didn't save it, but what did it do? Close the form. Now, we could have had all kinds of other things that we were saving there. I don't think we want to close the form. So we're calling save data here. And so, because this is actually happening over here on the unclick. I mean, on the when we click the OK button, we're calling save data, and then regardless of what happens at save data, we're unloading the form here. What should we do? Go ahead. Oh, okay, what if we made save data a function? And then we could send back a value, whether we're closing or not closing, whether the data actually got saved or not. I like it. So instead of sub, let's call this a function. We'll say as Boolean. And then if we make it down here to where we're actually saving the text, let's go ahead and set save data equal to true. Okay, so now save data is going to do the same thing, except it's going to either send back false or true. And only actually will send back true because false is the default value. It'll only send back true if I actually get to this line. So now save data is going to evaluate to true or false. So I better do something with that return value, and I can just put that in an if statement. If save data, then, or we could say if some of you will be more comfortable with this, if save data equals true, then unload. Otherwise, don't unload, leave the form up. Let's go ahead and try that again.
Just for clarification, because I think I missed this one on the test. The difference between a function and a sub-procedure is a function have a return value.
That is the only difference. So functions and sub-procedures exactly the same to each other, except the function sends a value back to where it was called when it's done running. So that's why we can now look at what comes back, and we're going to say, listen, if what comes back from save data is true, so save data will evaluate to true or false. So it'll say if true equals true, which is true, then we unload. Otherwise, if we never hit this line, it's going to return false. It would say if false equals true, then unload the product, unload the form. Sorry. If false equals true, this would be false. It would skip that and we'd move on. Do you realize that save data equals true is exactly the same as just saying if save data? Because this itself will evaluate to true or false. How many of you would like to see it better this way? True. I mean, that, if save data equals true, save data is going to equal either true or false. Who says, you know what, I kind of like seeing it better this way. Save data equals true. Yeah, I kind of do too. But the kind of the programmer in me goes, that's just more typing than I wanted to do in the first place. I'll probably just do it this way. Because it is itself true or false. Which way do I recommend you do it? However you please. It doesn't matter to me. However you like it. Questions? Okay, let's see. What have I forgotten to tell you? One more thing here. And let's go ahead and look back at come back to my code. The button has kind of an interesting property. Let's go ahead and put another button on for cancel. I'm just going to copy that button. And it came in as command button 1, so I'll change it to CMD cancel. I will put cancel as the caption. Okay, so it turns out that your command buttons have two interesting properties. I'm going to select the OK button, and I'm going to change the default property here to true. By making that the default button, and I only get one default button at a time, the default button will be now if the user presses enter on this form, it'll be just the same as clicking the button. It'll actually trigger whatever the on-click does. And on cancel button, I am going to put the cancel property to true. So this is the cancel button. So now pressing the escape button will be just like clicking on the cancel button. We probably do want that cancel button to do something. What do we want cancel to do? We just want to unload the form without saving. So we'll just do unload form. And I got to that. I could have gotten to that by coming in here and choosing this object, choosing the click event. If I double click the button and the form editor goes, oh, you double clicked a button, you probably want to make something happen on response to click happening to this button. So it guesses that one right. So now I should be able to hit cancel, and that should disclose. Make whatever change I want here. Hit cancel, and it won't save, but it does close the form. Questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, did you talk about what the private sub means?
Oh, why does this come up as private? So yeah, when we create these, it puts private here in front. So private, now remember that we have some scope to variables. So variables can be either public, available from any other module. They can be module level, available from any code inside this module, or they can be private or local variables, only available inside the subprocedure that declared it. On a form, we actually have the ability to say, do we want to be able to invoke this procedure from outside of the form? So, we could actually say, oh, that form is loaded into memory, and we've got some other process running over here. We say, let it run that procedure over there. That's really unusual. Usually we're saying we just want this code inside this form to be accessible from the form itself. And so that's why it comes up by default as making that private. That says it cannot be called from outside of the form. Another procedure inside this one can call it, but can't be called. Now, I've just kind of from a little bit of sloppiness when I should show data, I probably don't really want show data accessible from outside the form. If I did want it accessible, this is proper, this is a default, but I could come in here and say private. If I wanted to be explicit, I could say public. And that's the same as not putting any word there. But this probably should be private. Same with save data. Yes.
So just to clarify, a public variable is open to any module, but that's not the case with a public sub. It's just available outside.
No, it's the same scope. If I said, if I had a public, if I made this public, it would be available from any other module. If my procedure here is public, or there's no word here, then it is available to be called from any other module.
The sub procedures are public by default.
Sub procedures are public by default. That is correct. Yeah. In fact, when, is this true? It might have been something that got introduced into VB before they made VBA. But it used to be there was no public or private scoping. That was kind of a level that was added after the language was invented. But it might well have been in place by 95 when they kind of took current VB, which was VB version 6, and said, let's put it into Excel. Okay, other questions? That gets us started with user forms. And next time we get together, we'll finish off this example. So we'll bring in some more data, use some different kinds of controls, drop-down boxes, option buttons, and so forth, and make it a little bit more sexy. Thanks for coming, folks. Class dismissed.